You like to get lost in the immersive tales of literature, film, and TV to distract yourself from your mortality and other things that plague you? Well, have I got just the thing for you. I'm going to recommend some books and compare them to films and TV shows that you might like, and vice versa. We're having a little bit more of a chill video today. We're having a little more of a chat about art, a discussion about the highs and lows of college football.
I dropped out in the 4th grade to run drugs to support my nana.
The recommendations aren't like a one-to-one exact map, but are based on elements like plot, themes, and, to put it academically, vibes. So pop a squat and let me prescribe you some sweet, sweet escapism to float away to. I made a recommendation video once before on my channel, so I also post what I'm reading and watching on my Instagram. Recently, I've been making my way through the Greta Gerwig Barbie film inspirations letterbox list, and I post my thoughts on all of them. So follow me there if you want to see more kind of like sporadic recommendations. If you are a fan of the 1996 cult horror film The Craft, I think you would enjoy the book Bunny by Mona Awad. The Craft follows a group of 4 outcast teen girls who get into witchcraft to kind of like take power into their own hands. They heal chronic skin conditions, they get revenge on pervy boys and racist bullies, they cast love spells, and they make hordes of dead animals wash up on the beach. It's not all fun and games, that witchcraft. Bunny is a book about one outsider, Samantha, and a clique of like rich girls who are in her MFA program with her. All the girls in the clique call each other Bunny, and Samantha eventually kind of gets sucked into the clique and discovers that they are performing like dark magic rituals and creating monsters. Both Bunny and The Craft have central themes of like being an outsider, female friendships, and witchcraft, and both use horror as the magic kind of turns dark. Bunny contrasts the clique's like hyper feminine style with their dark actions, and I actually found it really interesting to see witches written as like hyper feminine girlies, because I feel like normally we see them in a very like gothic style. It's written in a very like surrealist style at times, and the boundaries kind of blur, so you're not sure what's real and what is imagined. It's also been compared to The Secret History because it's set in New England college. So if you're into the dark academia aesthetic, you might also like this. Also, just look at the beautiful bright cover. I love her. On the flip side, if you've read Bunny and you really liked it and you want to watch a film that's similar, I highly recommend The Love Witch. It's similarly surrealist and hyper feminine, and the Love Witch casts love spells. People die. It has a gorgeous Technicolor aesthetic and borrows from like the films of the 1950s and the 60s, both in its like visuals, with its costuming, its set design, but also its kind of like stilted form of like bad acting almost.
I've been tossed in the garbage, except when men wanted to use my body. So I decided to find my own power.
It was written and directed by Anna Biller, who also made all of like the set decorations and costumes by hand herself, which is an amazing feat. If you're interested in an in-depth analysis of The Love Witch, I have done one myself. It's in my video on witches, so if you're interested in that. Oh, I also talked about The Craft there, I think, a little. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once is an incredible and groundbreaking film. It resulted in several monumental award wins for its principally Asian cast and also for the crew. It's also one of the most like visually stimulating and unique films to come out in recent years. Like, I think it could be like a masterclass in editing and special effects. It's the same with the release of Crazy Rich Asians, but Everything Everywhere All at Once sparked a lot of conversations about Asian representation in Hollywood, given that a lot of the actors who won were the first Asian actors to win in their categories. So if you're interested in the history of Asian representation in cinema, or just kind of representation in cinema in general, I highly, highly, highly recommend the book Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. It came out in 2020, and it's a fiction book in which parts are written or like structured like a screenplay. It follows an Asian actor named Willis Wu, who is cast as characters like generic Asian man or background Oriental male, but he aspires to be the Kung Fu guy. And similar to how I was saying that Everything Everywhere All at Once felt like something something we've never really seen before. Interior Chinatown is an extremely innovative and imaginative novel, from its screenplay structure to its story. And it looks at how Asian characters have been reductive, racist, and orientalist in Hollywood films. But it doesn't feel like a textbook or like an educational read or anything. It's all kind of shown with a kind of lens of like humor and kind of just like showing how ridiculous and absurd Hollywood's like stereotypes are. It's also really like sharp and insightful, and I've never read another book like it. I actually borrowed it from my friend, but I really want to buy it so I can reread it. I also have a second recommendation for Everything Everywhere All at Once. I recommend Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I actually left this on my windowsill, so it got like the cover got sun bleached, which is not something that ever happened to my books before, but it's kind of fun. Michelle Zauner is a musician who goes by the name Japanese Breakfast, and this is a memoir that details Zauner's relationship to her mother, her growing up, her Korean American identity, the beginning of her music career, and the cancer diagnosis and death of her mother, and her kind of dealing with that grief. When I kind of lay it all out, it sounds like it would be a really kind of heavy read, but it's written so beautifully. Like, you can tell that she's also a lyricist. The way she writes is just fantastic. It's a very raw and emotional look at like mother-daughter relationships and kind of all the conflicts and contradictions that they can hold. I also think if you're a fan of Lady Bird, which again kind of details that kind of mother-daughter relationship, you would enjoy this. Moonlight is a 2016 film from Barry Jenkins that follows a man, Chiron, through 3 different stages of his life: childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. He's a closeted gay black man who only expresses affection in isolated events with another man, Kevin. It explores masculinity, queerness, black identity, and how these 3 things kind of affect one another. And it's an incredibly tender film. The style and cinematography of Moonlight is so richly layered, and the color in particular echoes back to the film's title, which is taken from the title of Tyrell Alvin McCraney's play In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue, a quote which also occurs in the film. And Nicholas Bertel's score is fantastic. I love Nicholas Bertel. Will Till the Day I Die. It was a radical release and Best Picture winner, and it again ushered in firsts for the first Black woman to be nominated for editing, Joy McMillan, and Mahershala Ali as the first Muslim to win an Oscar for acting. As I understand, queerness is even more taboo in Black communities. So not only is it breaking new ground in storytelling among Black people, but it's also one of the first mainstream films that we've seen that centers a gay Black man and kind of really dives into all of these like intricacies. If you're interested in reading more about love between gay men of color and how far we can kind of stretch love before it breaks, I highly recommend the book Memorial by Brian Washington. I actually loaned my book to one of my friends, but it follows 2 men, a Black man named Benson and a Japanese American man named Mike, who are in a relationship and living together. And then at the beginning of the novel, Mike flies to Japan to kind of reunite with his dying father, and Benson is left like living with Mike's mother. All of the characters feel very fleshed out and nuanced. It's just such like a rich text. Like, Washington is able to assign incredible emotional weight to everyday moments like cooking rice. And like Moonlight, it examines kind of identity, race, sexuality, and how all of those things affect one another, and how they don't just impact romantic relationships, but relationships with family and friends. Memorial has also been bought by A24 to turn into a film, with the screenplay written by Brian Washington himself. So you should read it soon so that you can be one of those people that's like,
yeah, no, I read it before it got turned into a film.
More on the note of gay men of color, I highly recommend On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, who is a Vietnamese American poet. This is one of my favorite books I've ever read. Also one of the best written books I've ever read. Like, Ocean Vuong has such a talent for writing the most like gorgeous, intricate prose that again is like so layered, and he's able to assign such like deep symbolic weight to like images of like seeing his own reflection caught somewhere. He's like genuinely just a genius. This is a novel kind of written in like a memoir kind of format as letters to the protagonist's mother. It goes through like his grandmother's experience in the Vietnam War, his family leaving Vietnam, his mother's experiences in America working in a nail salon, and also his own experiences like growing up in Connecticut. It's also just a very like intimate look at his own sexuality. I don't really know too much about the Vietnam War besides kind of what I've seen in media, and a lot of that media has been American films, and all those films center the perspective of the American soldiers, and Vietnamese people, if they're even in it at all, are like the enemies. Books like this are just very important to see multiple perspectives because it's very easy just to get caught in, the one that's fed to you. I genuinely cannot stress enough how beautiful this book is. And this is just a tiny little add on to this. If you're interested in a book about kind of the Vietnam War and also Hollywood representations of the Vietnam War, I recommend the book The Sympathizer. Great book. The Babadook is a 2012 Australian horror film that follows a mother whose repressed grief over the death of her husband manifests as a children's storybook monster / gay icon, the Babadook.
You better work.
I talked about the Babadook in depth in my Mommy Fearist video where I talked about motherhood and horror. So if you're interested in an in-depth analysis, you can find that there. The Babadook depicts Amelia struggling as a single mother. She feels very suffocated by her son, and throughout the film, she harbors an unarticulated desire not to be a mother. It gives space to voice the frustration and sheer exhaustion of motherhood. It shows that Amelia isn't a perfect mother. In fact, a lot of the time, she's not a good mother at all, but it doesn't villainize her at all. Instead, it recognizes that she's not like just a mother. She is a person who, her mental health is just in the trenches.
Maybe it's because I went off my postpartum medication.
You were still taking that? You had Buster 32 years ago.
And that's how long I've been depressed about him.
Similarly, Night Bitch is a 2021 novel by Rachel Yoder. It is a magical realism story that charts how the kind of building pressure and, again, exhaustion of being a stay-at-home mom manifests in the main character developing the ability to turn into a dog at night, but not like
a cute little fluffy dog, like
a wolfish hound that like hunts and kills animals at night.
The transformation happens in a series of escalating events, like, finding that her canines are getting sharper, finding patches of hair, developing a little bit of a tail, kind of similar to like Teen Wolf and Ginger Snaps. And yeah, if you like Ginger Snaps, you'd probably like this book. Like The Babadook, it looks at motherhood, the pressure of having to be a perfect mother while also having like your entire life together. Unlike Amelia in The Babadook, though, this protagonist is married and her husband is like the breadwinner, but he's also absent a lot of the time with work. So it looks at the traditional gender roles of the nuclear family. It's funny and absurd and revolves around female rage and like monstrous women, two of my favorite things personally. It's also being turned into a movie with Amy Adams, who, if you know she's involved, you know it's going to be great. And again, like Memorial, read it soon so you can be one of the I read the book before it was a film. I'm cooler than you. I'm better than you kind of people. On a bit of a lighter note, if you're looking for a book that sucks you into like a Sex and the City-esque setting, look no further than Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I'm comparing it to Sex and the City because both center women who struggle to have it all. Like when one section of your life, like your career, is thriving, another section, like your love life, might be in the gutter. I also saw it compared to Bridget Jones's Diary because it tackles the same themes, and like all three managed to talk about serious issues with like humor and levity. This is probably the most popular book that I'm recommending. It's a 2018 memoir about Dolly Alderton's experiences in her 20s, about how she struggled to balance work and friendships and relationships and partying, and like that weird transition between being a teenager and then being an adult in that kind of limbo where you're supposed to like figure everything out and like become a full adult who like knows the ins and outs of taxes. It's really a book that feels like an older sister kind of telling you like, here, this is how I fucked up in my 20s. It's okay to not have it all together. It's okay to be messy and like make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. It's very like comforting and reassuring and funny because adulthood is terrifying.
I'm sorry. I don't have any.
Are you joking right now?
I'm a little baby. No, you're a full-grown man.
I'm a baby. I have no money.
On the flip side, if you really enjoyed Everything I Know About Love, I think you would like The Worst Person in the World. It's a Norwegian film from 2021 by Joachim Trier. It follows Julia, who starts off in medical school, switches to psychology, and then ends up in photography. So if you couldn't tell, she doesn't exactly know what to do with her life. She feels like lost and insecure, and she's in a relationship with a man who's 15 years older than her, and he kind of has it all together. His friends have it all together, and that kind of gap in, life stages, again, just adds to her insecurity. And like Alderton, she's messy and she makes mistakes and she meets others who also make mistakes. The story is funny, it's romantic, it's poignant, it is a beautiful film, and it has a style that, like the other films I talked about, feels very like fresh and exciting, and it's just a story about a messy young woman. So as a messy young woman, of course I loved it. Fresh is a horror film from last year by Mimi Cave, starring Daisy Edgar-Jones and Sebastian Stan. What starts off as a romantic meet cute ends up as a horrifying meat cut. See what I did there? When on a weekend away, Nora, Daisy Edgar-Jones' character, discovers that Steve sells human flesh. It examines gender roles, misogyny, the objectification of women, kind of through the lens of like cannibalism, and how like women's bodies are no longer just like kind of objects for like visual and physical kind of consumption, but like literal consumption. If you like this kind of cannibalistic social horror, I recommend Tenders of Flesh. Tenders of Flesh is a 2017 Spanish dystopian novel by the author Agustina Basterrica, and I read the translation by Sarah Moses. It's set in a world where a virus has contaminated all animal meat and rendered it inedible, so people have resorted to eating humans, and it's made legal. There are like slaughterhouses with people. The protagonist is a man who works at the slaughterhouse, and it kind of looks at his moral conflicts, and the line between like human and animal, kind of like consumer and product, become especially blurred when he starts taking a liking to one of the factory made women. It's a really interesting examination of industrial farming, capitalism, exploitation. For some reason, I've just taken such an interest to cannibalistic horror. Like, that's what I did my dissertation on in college. I did on the film Raw, which is my favorite film in the world. It's such an interesting like vehicle to examine the boundaries between human and animal, or like human and monster, and like unlike other conventional horror monsters like werewolves, vampires, demons, etc., the cannibals are just people, and it's kind of just like they have made this choice to become like a monster, or have they? It's just such an interesting, rich topic. I wanted to hop back in and just say, but I ended up not including one of the recommendations by accident. If you like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and for me, I'm picking this one because it felt super radical in its like kind of depiction of lesbian love and like the female gaze, and it was the first film that I saw anyways that really kind of captured this like intimacy and this kind of way of looking between women that's very different from the kind of stereotypical like male female subject object kind of like gaze. If you're interested in that kind of like feminist theory, kind of like feminist art kind of thing, I recommend Adrienne Rich's Essential Essays on Culture, Politics, and the Art of Poetry. The first section of this book in particular kind of talks about how female writers kind of need to craft their own language, their own style, to separate from the like male canon. And like I've underlined actually you can't even see, but I've underlined so much of the first essay, which is When We Dead Awaken. This kind of ties into what I was saying about Portrait of a Lady on Fire. No male writer has written primarily or even largely for women, or with the sense of women's criticism as a consideration when he chooses his materials, his themes, his language. But to a lesser or greater extent, every woman writer has written for men, even when she was supposed to be addressing women. She also writes, there were all these poems about women written by men. It seemed to be a given that men wrote poems and women frequently inhabited them. These women were almost always beautiful, but threatened with the loss of beauty, the loss of youth, the fate worse than death. Or they were beautiful and died young, like Lucy and Lenore, or the woman was like Maud Gonne, cruel and disastrously mistaken, and the poem reproached her because she'd refused to become a luxury for the poet. I feel like I could read out like every quote that I've underlined, but She says, I wanted women poets to be the equals of men, and to be equal was still confused with sounding the same. So those are from the essay When We Dead Awaken, which you could also just read separately. She also just talks about other things like motherhood and being a woman. She has a famous essay called Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence. If you didn't know, Adrienne Rich was a lesbian poet. And that, again, if you're interested in like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, lesbian representation, really interesting. And she just talks about like her art and like literature in general, and like, you know, kind of being a woman, being an artist as a woman, and like balancing kind of like writing your own canon and like not imitating the works of men before you, and like, I don't know, it's just so interesting. And I had it beside me, but I completely just forgot to mention it. Spike Jonze's 2013 film Her is one of my favorite films. It is a very like warm kind of like tactile look at sci-fi that in a genre that is dominated by kind of cold, digital, like neon kind of styles. And having this future where it's not like completely bleak and like gray is just really refreshing, and something that we just don't see in the sci-fi genre. But it's also a really like intimate and personal look at our relationships with technology and how they impact our relationships with one another. Theodore gets an AI personal assistant, Samantha, after his divorce to kind of like sort his life out, but she ends up being much more than an assistant, and they kind of form this very like personal, romantic, deep relationship with one another. A novel that really feels like this film is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's a 2021 novel where AI robot companions are sold to families as a companion for the children. It follows one of the robots, Clara, as she becomes a companion to a chronically ill child named Josie. Like her, Clara and the Sun is a kind of refreshing take on the sci-fi genre because, again, it's very like warm. There's a lot of sunlight, and sun is like a major kind of theme in the book, but it's also from Clara's perspective, when normally in this kind of story our perspectives are like with the human characters. It shows like the depth of her emotions and her humanity, and like her kind of consciousness develop as she wants to kind of gain independence and kind of discover more about herself. And not only does it have themes of AI and technology and like our relationship to both, but it also looks at like environmental themes. I've read 3 Kazuo Ishiguro books. I just really enjoy how he writes. I really enjoy kind of the worlds that he builds and kind of how he really fleshes out nuanced characters, even if they are an AI robot. For films that deal with female like murderous rage, like Gone Girl and Pearl. Gone Girl is a thriller and follows Amy Dunn, the film from which the Cool Girl monologue came.
Cool girl is hot. Cool girl is gay. Cool girl is fun. Cool girl never gets angry at her man.
And it talks about this kind of like weight of expectations that women hold, the kind of like rage and resentment that builds up when extraordinary women settle for mediocre men and are kind of like forced into this box of like a nag or a shrew because like their partner is just not doing anything. And also the kind of construction of feminine beauty, the kind of ideal girlfriend, the kind of, again, like the cool girl monologue of like trying really hard to look like you're not trying. And then Pearl, which is a horror film, like a prequel to X, that again follows kind of like the box that women are put in, the expectations that are put on us from family and a community, and the kind of what happens when that rage and resentment and having to like repress your own desires become too much to contain and end up exploding. And in Pearl, it ends up in, you know, like a spree of murders.
Good for her.
A book that kind of deals similarly with that kind of construction of feminine beauty and identity, and also has kind of like murderous parts and cannibalism, is A Certain Hunger. This was a really fun book. It's about a food critic who like travels around, but then she will like meet different men along the way and maybe have relationships with them, but she kills a lot of the men and ends up like eating them, kind of in a like a Silence of the Lambs-esque way. When Hannibal is like,
I ate his liver with fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Or whatever.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
That's the vibe of A Certain Hunger, but it's a woman, so it's more interesting. Those are all my book/film/TV show recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any kind of recommendations in like a similar format, or if you have any recommendations based off art that I talked about today, please drop them in the comments, because I'm always adding titles to my never-ending list of books that I want to read, films I want to watch, TV shows that I want to watch. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you in my next video, which should be next week. Bye!